The war in Ukraine started as a veritable blitzkrieg, with Russia aiming to occupy the capital within only a few days and cripple the Ukrainian government. But as we all know, it didn't quite turn out that way. As the logistical and strategic errors started to pile up, the so-called special military operation has devolved into a war of attrition, where both sides are funneling incredible amounts of personnel, equipment, money, and research into eking out a small advantage. And now that advantage ultimately belongs to Ukraine. The reason? In defending itself, Ukraine has launched a devastating asymmetric warfare campaign against Russia on multiple fronts, using cost-effective methods and creating novel ways to eat up Russia's ability to sustain an offense. And the bad news for Russia is that with every new day, Ukraine is getting slightly better at conducting warfare at a disadvantage. So let's delve into how the past 3.5 years of the invasion have reshaped Ukraine's military, tactics, and even world geopolitics, and stances on asymmetric warfare methods. Now, when military theorists typically discuss asymmetric warfare, they're usually talking about insurgents with improvised weapons taking on conventional armies. In the war in Ukraine, we will need to expand that definition. Rather than fighting with improvised weapons out of desperation, even though there's a bit of that in the mix, Ukraine is also weaponizing Russia's inability to back out of the war, despite its progress shrinking rapidly over the last 2 years. Of course, when we discuss cheap yet effective methods of conducting modern war, we can't avoid talking about Ukraine's leaps in drone warfare capabilities. By early 2025, Ukrainian drones were responsible for between 60 and 70% of all Russian equipment losses, according to the Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI. And some estimates place the figure even higher, with the New York Times reporting that the number may be as high as 80% by mid-2025. Before the war, drone warfare on this scale practically didn't exist. Both Russia and Ukraine helped bring it to this level of success. One of the key points of using drones, particularly cheap, modified, commercial drones, is the cost disparity between threat deployment and threat nullification. From a procurement perspective, drones have arguably become one of the most widespread military tools, which further drives down the price and increases the mathematical advantage. For example, first-person view or FPV drones, which are considered the backbone of both countries' tactical drone forces, cost approximately $400 to $500 per unit. Even with some modification to attach ordnances or better gear, it's estimated that the most advanced models rarely go above four-figure prices. Yet these cheap, expendable weapons are routinely destroying Russian tanks that cost between $1.5 million and $4 million each, or even artillery systems worth $5 million. A swarm of drones can completely nullify an advanced radar or nuclear-carrying bomber, which costs tens of millions with its loadout. The Operation Spiderweb, executed on June 1, 2025, showcased just how practical drones are. Ukraine used 117 FPV drones to strike 5 Russian air bases spanning 4,300 kilometers. The operation destroyed or damaged 41 aircraft, including Tu-95S and Tu-22M3 strategic bombers. The total cost for Ukraine was between $1,000 to $117,000 for the drones, plus operational support, but the value of the destroyed Russian aircraft, over $7 billion. That's a cost-exchange ratio of approximately 1 to 58,000. For every dollar Ukraine spent, Russia lost $58,000 in irreplaceable strategic assets. And these are platforms that Russia would rely on to launch cruise missiles at Ukrainian cities or bombers that took years to build and can't be replaced, given current sanctions and manufacturing constraints. But the drone revolution extends far beyond destroying expensive equipment. It has rewritten the psychological calculus of modern combat. Every Russian tank commander knows that a $400 drone, flown by basically a teenager with a gaming controller, can destroy their $3 million tank and end their crew's lives. Russian pilots flying near Ukrainian-controlled territory face air defense systems and drone swarms that make survival probability calculations look increasingly grim. In some sectors, like the recent battle for Dobropelia, reportedly out of every 10 Russian soldiers attempting to advance, only 1 survived long enough to surrender. This was accomplished by a sheer scaling of development and production capabilities on Ukraine's side. In 2022, Ukraine produced around 5,000 drones. By 2025, the nation expects production to exceed 4.5 million units annually, with plans to reach 10 million if funding and components remain available. This is a 3,750-fold increase in manufacturing capacity in just 3 years, a feat that would be impossible in traditional Western defense procurement systems where programs take decades to field. The secret to this explosive growth lies in Ukraine's radically decentralized production model. Hundreds of Ukrainian tech companies now work on unmanned systems, supported by a distributed network of suppliers ranging from major corporations to garage workshops. When one team discovers an improvement, such as a better explosive mechanism or a more efficient guidance system or a jamming countermeasure, that information spreads across the entire network within days through platforms like the Brave One information coordination system. This is then coupled with Ukraine using these drones to conduct increasingly efficient swarm strategies that aren't easily countered by contemporary methods. Swarms abuse the primary downside of traditional air defense systems, where an interceptor missile is launched at a high-value target such as a bomber or fighter jet from standoff range or into a ballistic missile during the last part of its course. But that assumes the target is a single entity worth millions of dollars that can be rendered inert in a single precise hit. Drone swarms are the exact opposite, made from cheap, interchangeable flying machines that just keep coming. Using an interceptor in that case is basically wasting it. Of course, drone swarms are much more susceptible to machine gun fire and traditional arms due to their being slower and flying at lower altitudes. But this is where the numbers advantage comes up again. The first few might be destroyed by electronic warfare or anti-aircraft fire, but if the 4th, 5th, or 10th drone reaches its target, that's all that matters when drones cost $400 and tanks cost $4 million. In contrast, Russia operates behind a centralized, bureaucratic military-industrial complex. While Russian state media acknowledges that the military needs 120,000 additional engineers to keep pace, Ukraine's distributed model makes every workshop a potential innovation center. Ukrainian drones evolve faster than Russian countermeasures can adapt. They're developing fiber-optic guided drones that resist jamming, weeks after Russians debuted them on the field. AI-assisted systems allow for swarming capabilities that overwhelm defensive systems, and with development turnarounds measured in weeks, each iteration is more capable than the last. The naval drone warfare dimension is practically in the same boat, pun intended. Ukraine's Sea Baby drones cost approximately $200,000 to $300,000 depending on configuration. Programmers forced Russia's entire Black Sea fleet to retreat from its primary base in Sevastopol. Warships costing hundreds of millions of dollars need to hide in distant ports and are rendered combat ineffective by threats that cost less than a luxury car. To put things into perspective, Ukraine practically didn't have a navy at the start of the war, yet it managed to seize back control over its Black Sea shipping lanes and revitalize grain exports to pre-war levels. That's asymmetric warfare at its finest. And while drones are typically low altitude, which would preclude them from being effective against Russia's overwhelming air force numbers, Ukraine has managed to shore up its weaknesses in that regard as well. Thanks to timely donations from Western allies, Ukraine has managed to receive vital Patriot defensive systems and other supportive batteries, which dissuaded Russia from using its planes for long enough until more layered defenses could be set up. The result is that Russia, with roughly 1,400 combat aircraft at the war's onset, has been unable to use its airplanes in any meaningful way. Most aircraft are now devoted to lobbing mid-range glide bombs to stay out of harm's way, severely dampening Russia's ability to control the front. This forced Russia to rely on long-range or standoff weapons, but layered defenses and electronic jamming proved invaluable once again. The Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS, compiled a report that suggested Ukrainian air defenses achieved an average intercept rate of above 85% against Russian missiles and drones. In pure numbers, between September 2022 and 2024 alone, Ukraine successfully defended against 11,500 Russian missiles. But Ukraine hasn't just defended its own airspace, it's also systematically dismantled Russia's air defense capabilities. Open-source intelligence group Oryx has visually confirmed the destruction of at least 17 S-400 launchers, 3 radars and 3 tractor vehicles since the war began. Each S-400 system costs approximately $500 million and requires years to replace. Ukraine destroyed them using drones and missiles worth a fraction of their value. Russia's response to this crisis is increasingly desperate, erratic, or even contradictory. Satellite imagery showed Russian Tu-95 strategic bombers at various bases covered with old tires, a makeshift defense against drone strikes. When that proved insufficient, Russia began painting their aircraft to try and make them blend into the background, essentially admitting it can't even spare actual tires for protecting $250 million worth of strategic bombers. Russia's tactics went from defensive to piss-poor in the span of a year, showing just how effective Ukraine's strategy is. The information warfare dimension adds another layer of asymmetry. Russia operates a massive state-controlled media apparatus, including RT, Sputnik, and domestic television networks that reach over 100 million people. Ukraine operates primarily through social media, transparency, and the credibility that comes from being the victim of unprovoked aggression. Yet Ukraine is winning decisively. Within days of the invasion, Ukrainian government social media accounts, President Volodymyr Zelensky's video addresses, and organic Ukrainian citizen content dominated global media channels. Images of Ukrainian farmers towing captured Russian tanks with tractors became viral symbols of asymmetric resistance. These weren't professionally produced propaganda campaigns, they were literally showing Ukrainian life on the front line and the country's ingenuity in trying to defend against a much larger enemy. And social media lapped it all up. With every successful defense, the Western communities rallied even more behind Ukraine. And when Ukraine managed to score some major wins on its own, such as invading Kursk in August 2024, NATO realized that it could donate much larger and substantial arsenals with the reassurance that they would be used to the best effect. Russia responded by trying to disrupt Ukraine's network, with some reports suggesting over 10,000 cyber attacks over the first 2 years of the war. Yet Ukrainian government systems and infrastructure have proven remarkably resilient. The Cyber Peace Institute documented at least 2,700 notable cyber attacks against Russian civilian agencies by Ukrainian and allied hackers, while Russian attacks numbered around 575. While Russia has technical sophistication and resources, Ukraine has motivation, Western technical assistance, and the moral high ground. Ukraine's information warfare strategy leverages asymmetry in another crucial way, exposing Russian failures to amplify the psychological and geopolitical impact of these losses. When Ukrainian officials detail successful strikes on Russian ammunition depots, oil refineries, or air bases, they're demonstrating to Russian citizens and soldiers that their government cannot protect even strategic assets deep inside Russian territory. Every successful long-range strike is both a direct hit on Russia's infrastructure, but also one on the information warfare front. Speaking of long-range strikes, Ukraine's campaign against targets deep inside Russia showcases just how much Ukraine has propelled its efforts and capabilities. Between 2022 and June 2025, Ukraine launched attacks on at least 300 major targets inside Russian territory, including ammunition depots, oil refineries, chemical plants, and strategic bases. The operational range expanded from attacks directly on border regions to a few hundred miles out. Through it all, Ukrainian long-range drones are still being iterated on, and if they aren't up to the task, Ukraine has already proven that it can perform precision strikes thousands of miles away from its borders. One of the notable victories for Ukraine here has been the consistent destruction of Russia's ability to make money, namely through selling oil. By some accounts, Ukrainian drones destroyed or damaged facilities representing approximately 17% of Russia's oil refining capacity. Reuters calculated that strikes on multiple refineries directly correlated with a 17% decline in Russian oil and gas revenues between March 2024 and March 2025, a figure further lowered by Western sanctions. So it's clear that Ukraine knows what it's targeting and is trying to eke out every advantage imaginable. But beyond trying to cripple Russia economically, Ukraine is also trying to prevent it from arming the forces that are currently invading Donbass and neighboring regions. This is primarily done through repeated strikes on military infrastructure, logistics channels, and supply lines. Take the September 2024 strike on Toropets as a prime example, which destroyed an ammunition depot holding an estimated 30,000 tons of ammunition, including recently arrived North Korean supplies. The explosion was visible from space. Ukraine's message here is clear. Distance provides no protection, and Russian military assets are vulnerable everywhere. These asymmetric capabilities translate directly into economic pressure that's slowly draining Russia of both offensive and defensive options. Russia's military budget for 2025 is approximately $142 billion, representing close to a third of total government spending and roughly 7.2% of GDP. This is the highest proportion of military spending since the Soviet era. Russia is spending more on its military than on education, healthcare, and social programs combined. But the budget also has top-secret add-ons that likely push true military spending to over 40% of the government's total budget, which shows just how deep a hole Russia is in. But all that spending isn't translating into battlefield success. Let's go back to Oryx's visual confirmations, which suggest that Russia has lost over 13,000 armored vehicles from the start of the invasion until October 2025, including approximately 4,150 tanks. Military analyst Andriy Tarasenko warned that Russia's repairable equipment reserves could be exhausted within 12 to 18 months unless production increases to 700 to 1,000 armored vehicles annually. Yet Russia can only produce approximately 250 T-90M tanks and 460 BMP-3 infantry fighting vehicles per year. The math simply isn't working out in Russia's favor. To combat this, Russia is also being forced to pull progressively older equipment from storage. After starting with relatively modern T-72s, T-80s, and T-90s, Russia moved to T-62s by May 2022. By April 2023, Russian forces were deploying T-55s, tanks that first saw service in the 1950s. The economic asymmetry extends beyond equipment costs. Ukraine's distributed drone production model means marginal costs per unit remain incredibly low, even as production scales. Russia faces increasing costs as it depletes Soviet-era stockpiles and must rely on more expensive domestic production, complicated by sanctions cutting access to advanced components. Russia's oil and gas revenues, which historically accounted for 30 to 50% of government income, plummeted 35% year-over-year by mid-2025. European Union sanctions dropped Russian oil prices by $12.4 per barrel, a decline of roughly 15%. Meanwhile, Russia must compensate by squeezing its own population. Starting January 2026, Russia will increase its value-added tax from 20% to 22%, with the additional revenue directed primarily to defense spending. The human cost only amplifies this economic pressure. Several sources have claimed that Russia has suffered over 1 million casualties since the invasion began. Russia's daily casualty rate is also slowly increasing, going from 560 at the war's start to over 1,300 by 2025. Each casualty requires compensation to families, medical treatment, or replacement training. Couple this with the fact that as of 2025, Russia's military eats for 3% of the country's labor force, a 40% increase from 2020. These are working-aged men systematically removed from productive economic activity. Combined with the exodus of approximately 1 million Russians who fled the country in 2022 alone, Russia is simply running out of people to work in its industry or join the army. And even that military-industrial complex isn't really producing results. Beyond middling progress on the front, Russia's military exports practically disappeared by 2024. Potential customers watched Russian equipment get systematically destroyed by Ukrainian forces and naturally decided to shop elsewhere. With military production at a standstill, contractors are forced to accept below-rate contracts or face being singled out by the Russian government and closed down, or worse. Russia essentially admitted that the combination of a revenue drop and demographic challenges has strained the military when Putin announced a reduction in the military budget for 2026. But reducing military spending while Ukraine's capabilities continue growing is a recipe for battlefield defeat. For reference, Ukraine's military spending in 2021 was around $6 billion, but it's since ballooned to over $70 billion by the end of 2025. Zelensky had suggested military procurement alone is costing $25 billion, showing just how vital that part of the tactic is. And while Ukraine is increasing its budget exponentially and using asymmetric tactics to make it more effective in the short term, Russia is being forced to cut its own military budget down amidst major institutional bottlenecks. And these effects of asymmetric warfare can compound over time. Ukraine's distributed production and rapid innovation cycles means Ukrainian capabilities improve continuously. Russia's centralized, corruption-plagued, sanctions-constrained system means its adaptation lags. Traditionally, asymmetric warfare can be ineffective because the guerrilla side simply runs out of funding, equipment, or support. For Ukraine, this is nowhere near an issue. Donations from NATO have slowly ramped up to include not only Soviet-era and refurbished systems, but experimental designs specifically created for countering Russia's capabilities. Russian President Vladimir Putin faces an impossible dilemma. He staked his political legitimacy on victory in Ukraine. Admitting defeat would likely trigger a domestic political crisis, but continuing the war drains resources Russia doesn't really have available to spend in the first place. As such, Russia's economy is slowly reaching a terminal decline. It's nearing a point at which it can only marginally fund the war effort, but is unable to revert course and create growth during peacetime. Essentially, Russia is threatened by the same war machine siphoning every little scrap of money while providing nothing in return. And when the Russian population has had enough, we might be seeing revolutions on par with those that toppled the previous regimes in the territory throughout the centuries. Russia's only real option is accepting defeat before the cost becomes even more catastrophic. But given Putin's political investment in victory, Russia will likely continue paying the escalating price until the war machine breaks completely. And when it does, the world will study Ukraine's asymmetric warfare revolution for decades as the moment when distributed innovation and cost-effectiveness proved decisive against conventional military power, changing warfare forever. Thanks for watching. To understand how Ukraine continues to revolutionize modern warfare, check out our analysis of Ukraine's leaps in military budget through donations. And to stay up to date with the war's progress and other vital events in global geopolitics, subscribe to The Military Show for daily videos.